Hey, it's Ivy. So I decided to start telling my whole story for those who are curious. And I'll start from the beginning. Uh, so I was born in Kokomo, Indiana, which is home of corn, soybeans, and the former Grand Dragon of the KKK. My parents remember the KKK used to have marches where they, walk by in their hoods and their crosses, and they'd be like, "Not going outside today." Um, so yeah, that's where I was born. Um, I guess I'll rewind a little bit and talk a little bit about my dad and where he came from. Um, my dad grew up in Macau, and when he was growing up, his mother, my grandmother, was the fourth of four wives. So back in the day, you could have multiple wives as long as you could afford them. So first wife, if a man married first wife, she was the most important wife, and she got to live in the main home with him, and she got all the priority and preference for everything. Second wife also, got a decent house, nice place, and the dad would go and spend time with second wife and second wife's family. Third wife, lower on the totem pole, if a guy could even afford a third wife, because wives are expensive to keep. And my dad's mom was fourth wife. So lowest in the totem pole, poor country girl from the countryside of China, really just wanted, just trying to have a better life for her and her two children. And she didn't get to see her partner too much. My dad didn't get to see his dad at all. I think he'd see him like once every other month or so. And he told me a story one time of how he was really excited to see his dad one day. And he was playing because they're going to meet in a playground. So he's swinging in a swing and he's waiting for his dad. And he sees his dad. And he jumps off the swing. He starts running out towards his dad because he's so excited to see him. He only gets to see him once every other month. And as he's running across the playground, he's not paying attention. And this one kid who's also swinging hits my dad in the head. And he ends up having to go to the hospital to get stitches for the injury because he was bleeding. And he says he remembers what was most disappointing, most heartbreaking about that day. It wasn't, the physical pain from getting hurt. It was missing out on that time with his father. So my grandmother, my dad's mom, worked hard to try and provide for her children because she didn't get much money from her partner because he had many other wives and more important families to feed. So she worked as a janitor in a restaurant, and she was. I remember meeting her a couple times when I was younger. I remember she was. I never remember seeing her smiling. She was she came across as very cold and very strict and very stern, and she never hugged my dad. She never told my dad that she loved him. She was too busy trying to work her ass off as a janitor so that she could provide for him and his sister. So that was my dad's childhood growing up. He didn't have lots of warmth and love and attention modeled for him. It was drilled into him that we do what we need to do to survive, and that life is hard. And so that was my dad's side. On my mom's side, her father, my grandfather, both of his parents died from an opium overdose when he was little. And then at the age of 4, he was sent to live with like some great aunt or something in Hong Kong from the Chinese countryside. And when he arrived, his aunt was like, "Well, you can't stay here without paying your keep because life is expensive and I can't be expected to just like pay for you coming out of nowhere with your parents who passed away." So he would tell me stories, would tell stories of when he was 5, like going around and finding used newspapers and smoothing them out and trying to sell them the next day, trying to sell anything that he could find on the streets to give to his great aunt. So she would let him stay with her and be boarded by her. And ultimately, he ended up going, she gave him away. She gave him to a wealthier family because she was like, you're just still costing too much. So she gave him away to a wealthy family so that he could work for room and board, kind of as their servant. So at this point, he was like 11, 12. And when he was there, he met another girl who'd been given up by her family, by her parents, because they couldn't afford to raise her. And so this wealthy family, had both of them serve, cook, clean, all the things as kids. And so he met my grandmother there. And when they were 18, they decided to leave that house and run away together and start a life together, which they did. My grandfather worked as a truck driver. He had a job where he would collect leftovers from restaurants that people had eaten, not finished, and he would put all the leftovers of food into the back of a truck, and he'd drive it to a pig farm, and he would feed the pigs the leftovers, the scraps. And my grandmother tried to contribute too. She had like a little stand where she sold flowers and everything, and together they raised 6 kids. 2 passed away, but they raised these 2 kids in a tiny little studio apartment shared with other families. They had one hot plate, and next to the hot plate was a bucket, which was the toilet, and they didn't have beds or anything. Everyone just kind of slept scattered out on the floor. And I asked my mom, like, was this a horrible, traumatic time for you? Were you guys really sad and really stressed? Did you wish you had a nice comfortable bed to sleep in? She was like, no, we never thought about that. That was just how life was. And I was like, well, did your mom and dad ever tell you that they loved you and hug you and kiss you? And she's like, ugh, never. She's like, I've never hugged my dad, and I've never, agong, she calls him agong because that's grandfather in Cantonese. And she's like, yeah, we never hugged, kissed. He never told us that he loved us. He hit us a lot. He yelled at us a lot. But that was just how things were, that's just what you did with children back in the day. And we didn't know any better. So I think it's really important to remember our history and where we come from. And I'm grateful because of the chance to speak with my grandfather before he passed away. And I'm trying to, as much as I can, ask about and hear stories from my parents. And so I'll be sharing some more of those if and as they come up. But for now, I guess this is where I'll begin with my parents and their histories. My parents actually met kind of through an arranged situation. My dad, I guess, dated crazy women, including former Miss Hong Kong or Chinatown or something, and she got in this crazy argument with him, and she took his guitar and she threw it out the window, and crazy. And he broke up with her. And at one point, his mom, Mama, Chinese for grandma, was like, "You're 30 now. I think my dad's like, you're 32. You need a wife. You need to get married. You need to settle down." My dad's like, okay. So she basically introduced him to my mother, who was at the time working as a secretary in Hong Kong, and she was 23. My dad was 32, and they met once briefly in person. They hung out in Hong Kong. My dad flew back to Hong Kong to meet her because he was working in the States at the time for General Motors. And I guess it was decided that, they were going to get married. And I asked them at one point, Mom, why did you marry Dad? And Dad, why did you decide to marry Mom? You guys didn't really date for a long period of time. You didn't really know each other. You didn't have the chance to have experiences together. My dad is super logical, was like, Mom would be a good mother. She can cook, she can clean, she can have and raise children. And I was like, that's how you picked Mom? He's like, she's a good cook. I was like, okay. And Dad's like, taught her everything she knows about cooking. I was like, okay, Dad. And I asked my mom, why'd you marry Dad? This guy who lived across the world. And you'd have to give up everything that you've ever known in Hong Kong to move to Kokomo, Indiana to be with him. And she was like, well, I knew that Daddy would be a good provider. He was the only man I've ever met who had been to college and had a college degree. So I knew that he'd be able to provide for me and for our future family. And so that was my role. And, I look at them now. They've been married 38 years now. And they used to fight like crazy when I was younger. And I remember I used to bring tissues to my mom when she'd cry and be like, Mommy, you and Dad should get a divorce. Like me giving my sage, like 7-year-old wisdom. And Mom was like, no, you don't get divorced. You just keep going. And I was like, that sounds terrible. But it's interesting because now I look at them and they're a lot older now. My dad's 70, my mom's 61. And, I watch my mom cooking for my dad. And he, I watch her care for him and make sure that he exercises by walking on his treadmill. And I look at how my dad has taken care of my mom and supported her. And they've been through a lot together. And in recent years, I think more than ever, they've really learned to love and to appreciate each other in a way that I've never witnessed. I still fight sometimes, but nowhere near as crazy and as much as I did when I was younger. And there's just kind of a softness to them now. And so I asked them, so how'd you do this? This super long-term relationship thing. And Mom's like, you just do it. You just make a choice to be with someone, you love them, and you don't leave when things are hard, and you just make it work. And I wrote an article about it. I guess I'll post a link to something. But I'm glad that they have each other. And I'm glad that they made me. And so yeah, that's where I've come from. My history, I'm a first-generation American, so the first one to be born in the States, in Kokomo, Indiana. And growing up in the Midwest was a trip, but I'll get into that in another video. So this will be my video for today, the origin story, the beginnings. Thanks for watching.